I'm John David Bruja on location, standing in front of the Cape Tormentine Outer Wharf Lighthouse in New Brunswick. And welcome to a special edition of John's Traveling Movie Corner, United States Lighthouse Society, Nova Scotia and Prince Edward Island Tour. Well, it's another day, another lighthouse, and guess what? Another province. After leaving Halifax, Nova Scotia, we made our way on a Trans-Canada highway to New Brunswick. Well, our first lighthouse of the day was a bit of a challenge. Indian Point Range Rear Lighthouse. We did not find it, but we did find a lighthouse being built, Indian Point Lighthouse. And in the distance, our next lighthouse that we'll take a look at. Behind me is the Cape Tormentine Outer Rear Range Lighthouse. Their first one arrived in 1901. The current one behind me came in 1907. It's 40 feet in height, and restoration started in 2017, and unfortunately it became inactive in 1997. And the Cape Tormentine Outer Rear Range Lighthouse was also known as Ferry Road Lighthouse. And from this lighthouse, you can see our next lighthouse, which is the Cape Tormentine Outer Wharf Lighthouse. The first one arrived in 1901. The current one behind me in the 1940s. At 39 feet in height, it was located on the easternmost point of New Brunswick, and it was discontinued in 1997. We've reached our next lighthouse, Cape Juriman. The current light was constructed in 1870 at a height of 53 feet. John Bent became the first of 4 generations to serve as a lightkeeper at this lighthouse, and is the largest serving family of lightkeepers in Canada. And unfortunately, it closed in 1997 after the opening of the Confederation Bridge. And despite the fact of being eaten alive by mosquitoes, we did have a chance to go inside and up to the 2nd level. Well, we are now leaving Cape Juriman Lighthouse, and we'll be crossing the bridge behind us, the Confederation Bridge, which will take us into Prince Edward Island. While crossing the Confederation Bridge, we saw Sea Cow Lighthouse on the left, Port Borden Pier Light off in the right in the distance. Port Borden Pier Lighthouse was first built in 1925 at a height of 32 feet, and Port Borden Rear Range Lighthouse, which was our next destination. Well, we made it to our next province, Prince Edward Island, and we made it to our next lighthouse, Port Borden Range. It was built in 1918 at 22 feet, taking the name from the Prime Minister. The light moved twice, once in 1923 and then in 1954. Port Borden Range Lighthouse has 1 window on the seaward side. Unfortunately, it also was discontinued in 1997 due to the Confederation Bridge you see behind it. And ever since, it's been unfortunately neglected and abandoned. Across from Port Borden Rear Range Lighthouse, we saw Port Borden Front Range Lighthouse in the distance. We are now at Sea Cow Head Lighthouse. First lit in 1864, the octagonal wooden structure has a height of 60 feet and was automated in 1959. The keeper's dwelling was sold and removed in 1960. And in 1979, the light was moved back because the bank was eroding. And for all of those people who like watching the road to Avonlea, you will see it in the opening episode shot. Well, next up, Indian Head Lighthouse. Built in 1881 at 42 feet in height. And it has a very unique shape. It's completely octagonal from the lantern to the concrete base. And the base also contains the keeper's dwelling. It helped guide vessels through Summerside Harbor. After Indian Head Lighthouse, a couple of us walked through the wooded area and came across the former Summerside Old Range Front Lighthouse. Originally built in 1877 at a height of 38 feet, it is now privately owned, but they did allow us to take a couple of photos. Well, it's a new day, so that means more new lighthouses. And first up is the Summerside Rear Range Lighthouse behind me. Now this is unique because most lighthouses are owned by the public, the city, or the Canadian Coast Guard. But this one is privately owned. Hence, that's why I'm standing on public street to get photos from a distance. It was established in 1865 and built at a cost of $225. But apparently it was deemed not tall enough. So in 1960 it was extended, but not at the bottom, at the top, at the tower, to 66 feet tall. In 1904, the tower was enclosed. It was automated in 1952 and remains in use today. Next up, a couple of full lighthouses, then a quick shot of Summerside Front Range Lighthouse. Well, up next are kind of sister lighthouses. One is the Summerside Outer Range Front Light, the one that's behind me, and then next will be the Summerside Outer Range Rear Lighthouse. They both were constructed in 1991, one of the most recent set of range lights on Prince Edward Island. The front is at a height of 30 feet, whereas the rear is a little taller at 33 feet. Both have a square tower with a lantern gallery, but the rear has a better focal height with 49 feet compared to the front, which only has 31 feet. The light helps to guide vessels to the mouth of the Summerside Harbor near the Indian Head Lighthouse and is located at the western end of the harbor. And now I'm standing in front of the Summerside Outer Range Rear Lighthouse. This one is slightly taller than the front light, both with a square tower, lantern gallery, but this one has a better focal height of 49 feet compared to 31 feet for the front range light. They both were built in 1991, making them the most recent set of range lights on Prince Edward Island. Well, you can't always just see lighthouses. We decided to take a detour through Richmond Parish in the city of Cape Egmont to see the bottle houses and gardens. There they have 3 buildings built out of bottles. The Gable House, which was first built in 1980 out of 12,000 bottles. Then you have the Tavern, which was built in 1982 out of 8,000 bottles. And then finally the Chapel, which was built in 1983 out of 10,000 bottles. And in the backyard is a replica of Cape Egmont Lighthouse. Next up is Cape Egmont. Built in 1884 at 42 feet, it overlooks Northumberland Strait on the southwest shore of Prince Edward Island. And it has the same design as Wood Island and Cape Bear. Well, we are at our next lighthouse, West Point Lighthouse. Built in 1876 at a height of 67 feet, it is the island's tallest lighthouse. Painted white with a wide black horizontal stripe, it replaced the red horizontal stripe back in 1915. It's the only lighthouse on the island to have a dumbwaiter. Officially, this lighthouse only had 2 lighthouse keepers, and after the last one retired, the dwelling was torn down and the tower stood empty for years. Then around 1984, it opened as Canada's only inn, an entire active Coast Guard lighthouse with a 3-room inn, a chowder kitchen, and a museum in the tower. We had a chance to go inside West Point Lighthouse and climb up all the way to the top for a splendid view of the surrounding area. Well, it is our last lighthouse of the day, Howard's Cove. First built in 1960, the current lighthouse behind me was built in 1978 at a height of approximately 46 feet. Located on the western shore, the square white tower with a red lantern displays a white light. The wood pyramidal tower is one of the smallest in Prince Edward Island. Never had a lighthouse keeper because it was always electrified. Thanks for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed the show. I'm John David Bruja on location at Prince Edward Island, standing in front of the Port Borden Range Lighthouse. This has been a special edition of John's Traveling Movie Corner, United States Lighthouse Society, Nova Scotia and Prince Edward Island tour. I hope you enjoyed the ride.